I'm going to talk about business modeling, and then I'm going to get, well done, and then I'm going to get you guys going and doing some business modeling. Now, for those of you who had me last semester, actually last year now, aren't we? Whew, that's a bit crazy. Yeah, for those of you who had me last year, you'll have seen some of this lecture, but I just went through the canvas with you as an overarching principle. I'm now going to go into a lot more depth. For those of you who've not had me for a session before, I'm going to go straight into the depth because you need it already. So everybody should get something from today. Some of it may repeat, I don't know. I don't remember what I said half the time, so that works. The idea of business modeling is really important when we're looking at early stage idea creation, generation, and debugging. What I call iteration, okay? Rather than going full pelt into a business plan, it's useful to play with the ideas, to take a step back, to analyze them, and to see if they work. I liken it to putting a jigsaw together. We're going to put the jigsaw together and generate a picture. If bits of that jigsaw don't fit, we're going to take them out, play with them, and see if they work in different ways so that we can create a business that actually works, or that on paper should work. Okay? Now, the particular tool I'm going to use was created by a guy called Alexander Osterwalder. Osterwalder's a designer, and he looked at business modeling over a wide variety of different media in lots of different principles, and he said, right, there's lots of different ways of doing this, but they're all very bitty, or they're very complicated, or they require a degree of knowledge that somebody who's just starting out doesn't really have. How can we do this more simply? And what he developed is something called the canvas. Okay, this is the canvas. Now the canvas has a defined set of elements. Okay, each of those elements needs to fit together to create something which ideally will generate revenue, will have legs, will be able to grow into a larger enterprise. Now, the interesting part about each element of the canvas is that they exist as separate entities, but they're all interconnected. This is something that we're going to develop over the next couple of years of the degree as well, because we can use this canvas at very different levels. In one variant, what I'm going to talk about today, we can use the canvas to create an idea, to see if that idea works, to see if that idea fits together. But as you become more skillful and you understand more about the elements that actually underpin the canvas, you can use the canvas to be much more analytical and much more forensic in your businesses, and actually to test different elements of your business, see what works, see what doesn't work, trial different concepts, debug them, unpick them, put them back together, take them apart, and then hopefully run with them. So this is something that you will use again and again and again. It's something that even within my own company now, we use when we're trialing different models of supply, different models for how we might take the business forwards, or how we might develop particular units within the company. Okay? So it's a really, really powerful tool. Today I'm going to give you the very high level stuff, okay? How we can use it to put a business together and some of the thoughts around that. But I would recommend going off and having a look at what we've put on Blackboard, which goes into some more depth. But also, if you get an opportunity, do go and read Osterwalder's book on this. It's really, really interesting, and it links into a lot of other literature. I won't start getting into lots of theorists today and talking to you about lots of different people who've been involved in this. But there are lots of different entrepreneurs and different business educators who've been involved in this in various ways, and the canvas acts as a really interesting gateway to start to look at some of those and what they're thinking about and what they're talking about as well. Now, the canvas in and of itself, people have been using it now for about 7 years in different forms. So it's quite well tested. There are other business modeling tools out there, and there are other variants. One variant that David talks about, if you go onto the Blackboard, there's the idea canvas, which David talks about as well. And David's done a session about that on Blackboard as well, so you can go and have a look at that. This is a much, much simpler tool. It's useful if you're generating an idea. If you don't really know what you want to do, but you want to play with some different ideas, this is a really good early stage just to play with it, see how it might work. What you then would want to do really is take it onto something like this and start to operationalize that in a much more detailed way. For those of you who want to, but I'm not selling this at all, so please do bear with me. There is an app version of the canvas as well that you can get, and you can actually play with it on the app, put it together, take it apart, trial different ways. It's got a few more features in here as well, and if you're getting to a level where you're slightly more serious about your business and you want to get into things like cost structuring, the app's quite useful because you can actually put basic costings into this, and it will start to calculate whether they work or they don't work, how they fit together. It's not going to get into a detail of, say, basic profit and loss accounting or cash flow forecasting, but it will give you some concept ideas, okay? So there are a few different ways you can engage with it. Today, I've got these, okay? And after I finish talking, and I've given you a bit of an intro into the lecture today, I'm going to hand these out and get you either in groups or by yourselves, however you want to do it, just playing around with this and seeing what works, what doesn't work. You don't have to do it about the business you're going to set up. You can do, and I would advise for some of you, you might want to. But I just want you to have a go and see if you can get the idea of structuring something on the canvas. And then please do go away, use this and see what works. You can download these for free on the Alexander Osterwalder's website. We've got loads of them as well. You can take some away today if you want to have a play. I've got more than enough for everybody to have probably a couple each. So really do have a look at that as well, okay?
What's the app you mentioned?
It's just called the Business Model Canvas.
Business
Model Canvas, yeah. It's, if you go on Blackboard, there's a link to one of the videos that's actually straight off Osterwalder's website, and you can follow that down the rabbit hole, and you'll find the app and more about the book as well. Okay, the book is good. You can pick it up now quite cheaply as well. It's been out for quite a while. So again, if you're interested and you want to really go into a lot more depth with this, that's something you might want to pick up and have a look at. Okay. Now, in terms of the canvas, we don't actually start over here. We start over here. Some of you who I've taught before will remember that. The reason for that is we need to start with the concept of the customer and the value proposition. Now, I'm going to delve into those in detail, but why do we need to start with the customer? Exactly. Okay, really simple principle here. We've got to have an idea of who we're going to sell something to at the end of the day. Somebody's got to buy what we're selling. And there are lots of different kinds of customer and lots of different ways we can generate revenue from customers. But fundamentally, we've got to know who we're selling and the value proposition. We've got to know what we're selling to them. Okay? Now, I'm going to do a little bit of sales speak here. Who's ever had like a sales job or anything before? Okay? A few people. Have any of you heard the acronym FABS? Features, advantages, and benefits. Okay. There are some really basic reasons why people buy anything. Now, I started out many, many years ago in high pressure electrical sales. So I used to work for people like Comet and Currys and Powerhouse. And this was your bread and butter. I was one of those disgusting people who literally hunted people around a shop for many years. But it's a very good education in selling pressure sales because I didn't make any money if I didn't sell stuff. So you learn very quickly to be very good at sales, to analyze people, to understand why they were in the shop to buy something and to try to sell them the best product, or occasionally, as it was, the most expensive product with the largest quantity of insurance. I do apologize, but that was what it was all about at the time. It's a bit different now, fortunately, but that's education. Now, that doesn't exist in the same way anymore. I'm happy because it was quite unscrupulous in some areas, but unfortunately, that way of teaching people about sales also doesn't exist, and it
exists, just you don't know it yet.
Yeah, it's quite a powerful metric. So if we talk about why people buy anything, it breaks down broadly into three categories. Products have features, advantages, and benefits. The features are the actual physical elements of the product, okay? So if we talk about something like a fridge freezer, okay, it's a certain size, it fits in a certain space, it's non-frosting, it's got a certain depth, it's got trays that are a certain width, you can put so many bottles of milk in the door, right? Those are features, okay? So when somebody comes in, they will have measured up a space, they'll probably have a basic idea of what they want. Those are features. That gives you a number of products when you're selling to them. So very often what you would do early on in a conversation with somebody when you're talking about a product is you'll say, okay, tell me a little about what you're looking for. And they'll probably give you sizes, features that they want, particular elements of the product. That's great. I can straight away go down to the particular product. The advantages of the product might be those little added extras, so things like it's non-frosting, okay? And you pick those out of the conversations you have with people. But the real reason anybody buys anything is the benefit to them. That's the reason people buy products, okay? Benefits are the intangibles. They're the things that you've got to understand the person to be able to sell, okay? And those benefits can be physical, psychological, physiological, okay? There's a whole range of different elements, but if you take something like a fridge and a freezer, a particular benefit to somebody might be that it's got a child lock because they've got a kid that's always opening the freezer, okay? That, weirdly, and trust me when I say this, that was an incredibly popular American fridge freezer when it first came out. Water dispensers, ice dispensers, things like that. Because people have certain requirements. They want certain pains and problems to be taken away from them. If you can understand those, you've got a really powerful way to sell to people. Now, when I'm talking about this idea of value proposition in customer segments, I'm going to talk a lot about benefits. Now, I am presupposing in that conversation that you are going to have already contemplated what the features of your product are, okay? The benefits are really what matters though. The features, how the product fits together, as long as it does its job, basically that's okay. The benefits are what are going to sell. And when we're talking about value proposition, very often we are talking about benefits, okay? So that's just a little caveat emptor I want to talk about at the beginning, okay? If everybody familiar with the term caveat emptor? No.
Buyer beware.
Buyer beware. The most basic concept in sales legality is buyer beware. If you buy something from a shop, buyer beware, caveat emptor. It's on you to do your due diligence to check that that product is correct at the time of sale. You do have certain customer protections, but it's the oldest element of sales or really it still exists. Okay, so customer segments, okay? All the people and organizations you're creating value for, and it includes users and customers. Now, first of all, that's a very interesting division to make because not all users are customers. Does anybody understand what I mean by that? I can see a few people nodding and a few people that's gone over your heads. Okay, Google. Who's Google's customer?
There are people searching for things.
No.
Ah, the advertisers.
Yeah, advertisers, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Google's customer is the people who buy your data. Okay? The people who pay for keywords, the people who pay for adverts, they are Google's customer. They are the ones who actually pay Google money. We are users, generally speaking. Okay? Has anybody ever bothered to read all the terms and conditions of their various accounts that they've signed up for? Okay. How many people use Gmail? Didn't sell your soul and they gave you £5 off the purchase. Okay? The percentage of people who clicked the checkbox was so infinitesimally low, it's something like 4 or 5% of people who clicked the checkbox when it was running. What you're actually signing up to is fascinating, and it's something that you should all get very interested in because in most cases, we are not customers, especially of digital products. Very often we are users of digital products. We're not the customer. The customer is the people who buy your data to sell stuff to you. Have any of you ever bought an ad on Facebook? An ad. Anybody actually bought an advert on Facebook? Yeah, okay. Have you, it's terrifying actually the level you can pick down to in terms of Facebook advertising. And if you've not gone and had a look at this, go into Facebook, just go through the process of buying an advert. I could find of a certain age, within a certain postcode, who owns certain products, who like dogs. I can pick down to a tiny, tiny variable to send an advert to because of all the data that we give to them. We are users, we're not customers. It's what's called a two-sided model. So within something like the canvas, we can actually start to model that concept. We can say that, right, our value proposition is this for our users. They get a free email account. But actually, our value proposition for our customers is data. Lots and lots and lots of very, very high quality, incredibly detailed data. Okay? Google's been around now, I'm 32. Google's been around since I was about 15, 16 in various ways. So they've spent the better part of half my life mining my data. There's nothing they don't know about you. And that's fascinating. It's also incredibly frightening. But from a business perspective, that is really powerful. Okay? As David said earlier, we live in a knowledge economy. Data is data is worth an incredible amount of money. And the more data you have, the more you can focus down to particular groups and subgroups, the more that data is worth. So, when we're contemplating the concept of our customers, okay, we need to think about how we separate those out as well. Do they have different wants and needs in terms of the product? Okay, it's possible within even a single product to have lots of different customer groups. Okay, take mobile phones for instance. There are loads of people who buy phones, but the reasons people buy these are incredibly different. Okay, there are people like me who are a business user who primarily want my phone to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, the features, advantages, and benefits of that for me are quite defined. I'm looking for the fastest phone. I'm looking for the best way to handle email servers. Quite boring things. But for some people, phones are fashion. Okay, iPhones have not again just had one of the biggest launches in history of the iPhone 7 because they're the most powerful device, they're the technologically the most advanced device. They've had it mainly because Apple is a fashion brand. More so even than it's a technology company nowadays. And Apple really does understand that, and they're refining that more and more now in terms of how they sell products to people. Okay? Do their wants and needs justify different ways of selling to them? So again, on the canvas, we might be able to model a power business user and a fashion high street user. We can look at them differently. We can have the same price point, but we can have very different sales messages that get to them. And given the way that we can now model data, especially with online advertising, I can create totally different ad campaigns. Is anybody familiar with the concept of what's called A/B advertising?
We split the campaign.
Yeah. Most of you will never know this is happening to you, but I guarantee you that even in the next week, okay, everybody uses Amazon, right? Yeah, okay. So within the next week, any two of you logging onto Amazon at the same time will see a slightly different website. And that's because they're constantly trialing little tweaks, little A/B differences in the way they advertise to people. Okay? They move buttons around, they change site alignments, they change header sizes. Some things are huge. Sometimes, and I've done this with my wife, I've logged onto Amazon and she's logged onto Amazon and we've seen nearly a totally different website. Sometimes they're very small. Might be a footer moved, might be an image changed, might be a slightly different product alignment they're giving me. But that's A/B advertising, and using the web now, you can actually have one product, but totally different ways of advertising to those customers if you want to. And again, we can model that using the canvas. They're reached through different channels. It might be that it's not just that there are two different ways of advertising to them online. It might be that we have to have two different ways of advertising to them totally. We might have a more traditional customer base that's, say, still using print media, and a more advanced customer base, a more modern customer base that's using online media. And again, we might need to model different channels, different ways of accessing that customer base with the same message. Yeah?
Print media So excuse my ignorance.
Yeah.
Print media.
Sorry?
Print media, did you say?
No.
Online media and
Print.
Oh, print. Sorry, print media. They might require different kinds of relationship, okay? We have different relationships with our customers, but in some cases those relationships are deeper and in some cases they're at a more surface level. If a customer buys a product through an online portal, that's not a particularly deep relationship, okay? My level of knowledge about that customer is probably a name and address, maybe a few bits of banking detail, maybe some specifications they've given me. But in a lot of cases, my relationship with the customer might be much deeper. Now, within my own business, I have lots of different depths of customer relationship, okay? When we work with the NHS, our customer relationship may be as basic as an email that comes through and says, I need staff here, please send me staff. When I go and work with dementia care, mental health, care in the community, hospital at home, we can have very different relationships with those customers. And in fact, I may have files of specification sheets about what that customer can and can't have, what they need and don't, what we specifically need to do to care for that customer. Fundamentally, it's the same product, it's care, but I'm selling it in two very different ways. And in one sense, I charge X price, and in another sense, I charge Z price, okay? Because of the difference in that relationship. And that leads on to the idea they have different profit abilities as well. It is possible to sell the same product for different prices to different customer groups. Now again, that sounds a bit crazy, but there's always discounting and upselling in terms of product creation. How you segment those customers, how you advertise to them, the level of relationship you have, in the end defines the profit you might be able to realize from that particular customer. And it's all about how that relationship links together. Have I lost anybody? Is everybody basically following me so far? Okay, so to recap, when we're thinking about customers, how do we separate those customers? Are all customers really customers? How do we reach those customers? What relationship do we have with those customers? And are we going to realize different profits from those particular customers? Are all ways that we might segment them and put them into different groups, okay? And there's some more information there as well, just to give you some ideas. We're talking about mass market, niche market, segmented, diversified, multi-sided, B2B versus B2C. Okay, is anybody understanding those terms, or would anybody like me to give a quick run through them all?
Oh, please do.
Okay, so if we're looking at a mass market customer, okay, that's something like the Amazon example. We're selling a product straight out to a large market area. If we're looking at a niche market customer, that's a customer with very particular needs, okay? Niche market customers are generally going to generate a higher revenue, okay? Normally, when we're talking about niche markets, we could be talking about luxury products, but we could also be talking about products with specific features and benefits. For instance, in my industry, we have very particular CRM needs, okay? So what I mean by that is customer relationship management systems. Our customer relationship management system is incredibly complex because it holds all kinds of data. We're a very niche market for that, and actually the price we pay for that system is really high compared to if I was just able to buy an off-the-shelf CRM. I probably pay between 3 and 4 times as much for my CRM as somebody who just runs a little shop down the street would do. Segmented, so specifically demographic groups. What I mean by demographics is age, height, sex, weight, religious belief, any way that I can separate you, okay? And there are now lots of ways I can separate you. In fact, there's so many ways I can separate you, it's terrifying. Diversified, so diversified is similar to a mass market, but we're targeting particular segments within that mass market. So we might say I'm going to take a diversified approach, but I'm going to target these 3 customers or these 4 customers, and I'm going to do that in particular ways. Multi-sided is what I talked about before, which is the idea that in some cases we have a user and a customer within the same business. And obviously B2B versus B2C, for those of you who've been around the block a while, this is, are we selling to businesses or are we selling to end consumers? There are very different strategies that you need to put in place if you're going to sell to another business versus if you're going to sell to a consumer directly. And also, in some cases, different legal implications that creates as well, okay? I'm not going to get into that in a lot of detail today. That's a rabbit hole that we'll go down as the course starts to develop. So, customer segments. For every customer segment, we need to have a value proposition, okay? That's really the benefits that we're selling to somebody, okay? You can see there's a gap between those two still. We're going to fill it in a second, but let's just think about this for a second. So, the old adage in terms of selling to people really is what's somebody's problem, what's somebody's pain, okay? If we can solve a problem for somebody, we can create very powerful businesses and very powerful sales pitches for those businesses, okay? I've talked about different adages for this over the years, but again, I'm going to stick to Amazon in this lecture, okay? When Amazon came about, the whole idea was selling books to a mass market. Now, to us, it sounds relatively creative. This was a revolutionary idea because up until that point, book retail had actually been quite a niche thing to get into, and it had lots of blocks in place. Even just the understanding of ISBNs and how they're processed was very difficult for an online retailer to adapt to. So the ISBN is a little number on the back of your book. Every book has an ISBN. It's used to identify the book internationally as part of the sales process. You can't sell books really without ISBNs. Online retailers hadn't really been able to understand or deal with those properly. Amazon came about with a very simple premise. They said, you know what, we'll sell books and we'll sell them online and we can do this. We can put the infrastructure in place. They got a lot of resistance. Publishers didn't want to deal with them because they saw their revenues would go down. Okay? Bookshops obviously were very resistant to it, and customers were quite resistant because up until then books had been a very tangible thing. You went into a bookshop, you thumbed through them, you engaged with the book in a very physical way. Now we're at a stage even where we don't engage with written material physically. We have a Kindle, we buy an ebook, okay, we read them on our laptop. That's how far the market's changed in less than a decade, okay? Bookshops are finding it very hard now to compete unless they're in niche markets because the revenue is simply not there. The revenue is now with the big online book retailers or book resellers. The problem they've solved is ease of buying a book, but also selection, okay? Back when it was my local bookshop I had to go to, I might have been limited to buying one book on a particular topic. But now I can go on Amazon, I can buy any book on any topic, and I can buy multiple books on the same topic that look at different variants. And Amazon even handily gives me recommendations about what books I might want to buy if I've bought one. Because again, they've got data analytics. They understand that people who like this book generally like that book. They've made it very easy for me as a customer, but also for me as a retailer, okay? They've taken out the legwork of selling books. I don't have to go around bookshops trying to convince people to stock a particular book anymore. I put it on Amazon, the whole world can buy it. And Amazon deal with everything for me. Shipping, distribution, dealt with, done. I send everything to one big warehouse and Amazon deals with it from there. So from both perspectives, as an end customer who buys the book and also as a publisher who's selling to Amazon, they've simplified the process. They've taken away a lot of pains in that process. When you're thinking about your particular business concepts, it's a really useful idea to hold in your head. What problem, what pain am I taking away from somebody? It's something, again, that we embrace in terms of Arcadia and what we do within our business. We try to make engaging with us as simple as possible for our end clients. And that might be a client who's in a particularly vulnerable situation in home care, or it might be the NHS, okay? But we also try to make the process for our workers in terms of registering and keeping compliant with us as simple as possible. We try to take away their pain at every stage. And we are always simplifying, rebuilding, redesigning our processes to try and create that perfect balance of simplicity so that we are solving problems for those people. Okay? And the value can be both qualitative, so it can be this idea of problem and pain, but it can also be quantitative, okay? It can be the price itself, okay? So there are particular ways that we might price a product for particular customer groups that in and of themselves can be part of the value proposition, okay? Does anybody, if I say this, understand the concept of selling a product too cheaply? And I don't just mean in terms of losing money on a product. There is a perfect balance when you sell something. Now, part of that balance is obviously defined, the costs of production. But part of that balance is to do with psychology and what exactly is a customer willing to pay. Okay? This is something that takes an awful lot of research. You can have the right customer segment, you can have the right value proposition, but if you price it wrong, it's not going to sell. And it's not going to sell because the customer's not going to react to the price. Now, in some cases, that might be you need to set the price so eye-watering high that only somebody with a certain level of money is going to buy it. And as such, they're going to see it as exclusive, different, individual. But it also might be about setting that price at a point that's accessible to a mass market. That can be very difficult because if you miss that point, even by quite small fractions, you can potentially A, send yourself bankrupt, or B, lose the market. Because price competition is very sensitive. It's also very easy for people to compete with you on price. There's a really famous example. When Richard Branson first set up Virgin, some of you are probably too young, some of you may know about this story though. When Richard Branson first set up Virgin, he got an awful lot of competition from the major airlines. Now, previous to that, other airlines had tried to set up and tried to compete in the space of transatlantic flights. But whenever they did, the big carriers, ostensibly in England it was British Airways, basically put them out of business. And the way they did it was really simple. Most of these airlines came in at a very low price. They said, you know what, we'll get you over the Atlantic cheap. We'll get you over the Atlantic for, at the time, probably a couple of £100 for a ticket, comparative to today's prices. Okay? Well, British Airways went, great, you guys can do that. We can drop our prices to that level though. We might lose some money for a while, but we can lose that money for longer than you can. Very often when you get into price competition, this is what happens, especially if you're up against a bigger competitor. It's never sensible to get into a price fight with somebody who's bigger than you, because if they've got deeper pockets, they can price you out of the market for longer. I've experienced this within my own companies before. Okay, I have been involved in clothing in a couple of companies over my lifespan, and in one of those particular businesses, we were priced out by a competitor. We came in with a particular price. Our competitor saw us coming, had deeper pockets than us, held their price lower than us for longer. We couldn't really remarket or reposition ourselves in terms of where we were, and they just beat us out of the market. Okay? So I'm going to talk about this idea of price in a little bit more detail as well, but it's something to consider because price is part of that value proposition. If you don't get the price right in terms of the value proposition, the rest of what you're selling could be good, but you'll find it hard to get the customer to react to it. Now, there are different ways that we can talk about value. Here's a big list. Obviously, one example we've talked about recently, the new iPhone, the iPhone 7. It's selling an awful lot on the idea of newness, design, and brand. Okay? But also, a little bit on price. Think about how an iPhone's priced. It's not priced at the bottom of the market. It's priced to make it something exclusive. I've got an iPhone 7. Look at how much money I've spent. Okay? They know that. Apple know that. Apple could sell iPhones for a lot less money than they do. A lot less money. The percentage of markup on an iPhone is insane, even after the cost of research and development. Okay? The price is set to make it exclusive. It's supposed to be there. Okay? We can talk about customization, the ability to change something, to do different things with it for different people. We could talk about task fulfillment. We can talk about risk reduction. Does it take away particular risks? So for instance, if you're talking about, say, products that sell in the elderly care market, you very often come across things that one of their big selling points might be risk reduction. Okay? Is it accessible? Okay? So if we talk about products that might be aimed at particular market segments or people with particular disabilities or impairments, we might talk about particularly accessible products as well. Are they designed in specific ways to be accessible to particular customer groups? Do they have particular kinds of ergonomics considered within them? Okay, these are all different ways that we can market a product. We can talk about the value in our product. Is everybody happy with that? Okay, so on one side, we've got the customer segment, and on the other side, we've got the value proposition. What we need to do now is bridge the gap between the two of them. We need to talk about channels, okay? The way we're going to interact with the customer to deliver that value. Excuse me for a second. Okay. Channels are complex and myriad, and depending on how you're going to set your business up will depend on the channels you choose. But very basically, channels are normally either direct or indirect. Okay? We normally directly interact with a customer, or we sell to a customer via a third party. Okay? Now there are other models. Okay? But just for today, I'm going to try and keep this relatively simple. Okay? If we're selling to a customer directly, we might be doing that in person, we might be doing that through a website. Okay? We might be doing that over the phone. If we're selling to a customer indirectly, we might be doing that through a retailer, we might be doing it through a partnership, okay? Or we may be doing it through a wholesaler if we're going to business on a larger scale, okay? The channel, importantly, needs to have, or needs to be, should I say, needs to be sympathetic to the value proposition. It's no good picking a value proposition and then picking a channel that doesn't match that proposition. Again, if we talk very simply about this for a second, if I'm going to aim at a luxury market and I've set a premium price for that product and my value proposition is all about luxury, cost, brand and image, if I spend 50 quid on my website that was made by my mate Mick down the road and it looks like a pile of trash, my customer isn't going to interact with me, okay? If people buy a luxury product, they expect a certain way of that product being sold to them, okay? Your channel needs to be sympathetic to the value proposition and to the market segment you're selling to. The same is true of the relationship you establish with your customer, okay? Now, some people think of these two as the same thing, they're not, okay? The channel, the way we access that customer, can be different to the relationship we have with that customer through the channel, okay? So if you take online products now, I can have a very simple relationship with my customer. They can go on a website, click a button and buy something from me, or I can actually have a lot of interaction with my customer, okay? I can put feedback systems onto my websites, I can have pop-up windows, I can do video chats, okay? I can have a website with a contact form where I can then go back to the customer later. There's lots of different relationships I can create, even through something very simple like a website, okay? The relationship, and again, in the channel though, must be sympathetic to each other. There's no point in trying to build certain kinds of relationships in certain ways, and there are better ways of building certain relationships than others. If you're building a high-cost luxury brand, generally people are going to expect a high degree of personal relationship within what you're doing. Okay? So if your website says, yes, come and buy my 24-karat gold-plated iPhone and click one button to buy it, people are going to get a tad suspicious about that. Okay? No matter how good the website looks. Similarly, if you build a really cheap product, but you have a really in-depth relationship with your customer, that's not necessarily going to work. Okay? I'll give you a really good example of this. My wife runs a children's clothing and accessories company. Okay, She does it mostly through Facebook. And when she first set up her company, she was selling products at, I would say, the mid to low end of the market. But it required an awful lot of time investment from her, because what she was doing a lot of custom work with her customers. And I said, look, what you're doing is great. Your product works. You're selling to the right people, but fundamentally you're selling this at the wrong price, because the amount of effort you have to put into that relationship. And I'm talking, she might spend 3 or 4 hours on Facebook talking to a customer about the product, how it can be customized, how it can fit together, was costing her an awful lot of money. Okay? When I actually said to her, break it down, what's your hourly rate at the end of this? I got her to an hourly rate of about £2.50. And I said, you're earning under the minimum wage. You can go down to work at Spa and earn more than this. Okay? What's the point in running your business if that's all you're making out of it? Okay? Now, that's not the most sensible thing necessarily to say to your wife, and that's part of the problem of being a business lecturer and trying to talk to your wife about running her company. It's a very dark and lonely path I tread when I do that. But it's a very important thing to keep in your head. If fundamentally your business isn't going to pay you more than the minimum wage, you really need to think about why you're setting that up. Now, that might be to say at the start it's not going to pay a lot, but there's a long-term plan. That's okay. But make sure you realize that long-term plan or get out. Okay? Businesses are for making money from. They're not for putting money into. This is a very important definition that I like to get through to people. Okay? If your business is a money pit, close it, leave it, walk away from it. Okay? That's why we model these things. We model them to see if there's a potential to make revenue from them. If the potential to generate revenue isn't there, it's not a business, it's a hobby. Now that's great if you want a hobby, but hopefully you've all come onto this degree or this elective with the idea to make money out of something at the end. I used to have a friend that was even more defined than me. He teaches at Coventry. And he used to say to people, if you can't make more than the average graduate income from your business, don't do it. Okay? So do consider that. Okay? A lot of people have this thing when they first start a businesses, they go, oh, well, you know, don't want to sell it too expensively. People won't buy from me, I'm new. Okay? Right? You need to have a bit of something about yourself. I'm trying really to avoid being too crass at this stage. You've got to have a bit of front. You've got to be able to walk up to a customer, set a price, and have the confidence in your product and what you're doing that they will pay that price for it. Okay? Don't price yourself too low. Don't create a relationship or a value proposition or a channel that prices you too low that you can't generate revenue from this. And here's just some different examples of different relationships we might have with our customers, okay? Might be personal assistants, we might work very closely with them, okay? It could be self-service. So supermarkets are moving very much towards a self-service model now, okay? I don't know if you guys have them around here. Where I'm from in Grimsby, our Tesco's has just installed these big new Darth Vader tills that are actually big round conveyor belts. Has anybody seen these? Okay, so you have 2 or 3 belts that feed into the till, and on the till is a section like that. Your products all get lumped into one big section, and then it turns around and the next person's get lumped in, and then the till spins them round and spits them out and scans them without anybody going anywhere near it at all whatsoever. You don't even have to hold them, scan them, touch them anymore. Okay? That's because what's one of the biggest costs to a supermarket after you take into account the buildings? People. Take out people from tills, which is a massive area of cost. You can save a lot of money over the long run. Okay? So that example of the tills at Tesco's, supermarkets in general want to move towards automation. Another reason you may have seen those little hand scanners at Tesco's. Okay? You have effectively become your own till person. Okay? But it's fascinating when you actually consider the psychology of that for a second. Okay? Tesco sell that, and the supermarkets sell those little hand scanners as brilliant. You're free, you can wander at your own leisure, scan everything, check the pricing, You are saving that supermarket a crap load of money because you are doing the hard work for them at that stage. Okay? All you do is you walk up to a till, you put your trolley in, you scan the barcode, it does it all through. Brilliant. You've saved them loads of money. They've got one person supervising 6 tills. In the future, that's going to be one person supervising 20 tills. And once they crack the problem of weights and theft and scanning, it's going to be one person supervising a whole front of store. And they're not far off that now. Supermarkets are getting very savvy about security tagging, and there's going to be some really interesting RFID innovations coming out soon. Tesco's just finished a trial in France where they issued people with new club cards that actually changed adverts on TV screens as you walk past them based on RFID sensors. So if anybody's seen Minority Report, the film with Tom Cruise, it's a few years old now, but you know when he'd walk past something, it would change and alter. Yeah, that's how supermarket advertising is going to move towards. The adverts will follow you around the shop and talk to you. So if you don't like invasive worlds, that's coming. And the technology is probably only now a few years away. The big cost at the moment is the cost of screens. They're expensive. Once we crack lower density screen technology, that will be coming in a big way. Because then also, a massive cost of supermarket is point of sale advertising. If you've got screens everywhere, no point of sale advertising cost. Click a button, change all your POS overnight. You don't even need to send the POS out to a store. You can upload it to their central server and it all just appears there the next day. So there's lots of ideas like that coming around as well. Anyway, I'm digressing slightly. Community. There are whole ways of selling people based on communities and also based on co-creation. So anybody bought anything through Kickstarter, Indigo, any of the online crowdfunding platforms? Okay. I'm very interested in crowdfunding, not because necessarily I think it's the way forward, but because I think it's part of a trend that's now starting towards people investing in products and actually building them with people. Okay. So traditionally you would come out with a product, you'd take it to your customer and they'd buy it from you. Now I can have a very different relationship with my customers. I can actually come out with an idea and I can build the product in real time with my customers. They can critique features, they can give me concepts, they can have an input into the build at very early stages. And I can do this all because rapid prototyping has changed massively now. I can go to a 3D printer and I can print a product in an hour for a few pounds, not hugely expensive though, and you can buy a 3D printer for about £3,000. The only thing that stops me having one is my wife won't let me. We've had this debate in our household. Apparently it's too much money to spend on something that I'll use to print toys. I pointed out to her that Lego is not a toy, and again, that was a very dark and long and lonely road to tread. Revenue streams. So, once we've got all this bit worked out, we need to make some money, okay? I've already talked about quickly, so I'm going to gloss over this and skip straight to the next slide behind it, okay? There are lots of different ways of making money out of people. Lots more than just saying, here's a product, pay me for it, okay? We can talk about usage fees, okay? We can talk about subscriptions, leasing, licensing, advertising revenue. And now, given the wonderful developments of the App Store, I can even get into micropayments. I can give somebody a product away for free and make them pay for the features if they want them unlocking. The way to make money out of products is so myriad. People just aren't very creative with it, and this is one of my big issues. People think in a very linear fashion about revenue, okay? Here's a customer, I want to sell them something. Okay, is that the best way to do it? Could I license that product to them? Could I do a usage fee? I'm going to talk about one really, really good example of a product that's changed massively in the last 5 years. Has anybody recently used Photoshop? Okay. How is Photoshop now paid for? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so Photoshop, do you know that at one point, Adobe Photoshop was the most stolen product on the internet? And not just by a small degree. I'm talking by factors, okay? If we assume that Windows was stolen a lot, okay, and we'll just write Windows out, because Windows is an OS, okay? Windows was stolen, by the way, I actually went to a tech seminar once where I had the head of product sales at Microsoft who said, we understand people steal Windows and we don't really care. All they cared about was that people used Windows. In fact, they worked on a principle that about 70% of the market stole Windows because the people they really cared about were corporate clients who bought it on bulk. So a university like this buys Windows, pays tens of thousands of pounds a year to have site licenses for Windows. That's who Microsoft care about. You, who stole Windows last week, Microsoft do not care. They will try to make Windows break for you, basically because they like to, and it's an intellectual exercise for them, how to try and get you to pay for it, but in reality, they don't care, okay? Adobe had a bigger problem though. Adobe do care, okay? Photoshop was their leading product. It was also the most stolen product on the internet, okay? I'm not going to say on video whether I did or didn't steal it, but let's just leave that hanging, okay? It was a very well stolen product. So Adobe had to fundamentally rethink how they made people pay for Photoshop because they knew £300 or £400 didn't work, and yet that is the cost of Photoshop. Photoshop costs Adobe a fortune to develop. And if you use Photoshop and use all the features of it, you'll understand why. It can do some really complex and very cool and some very, very in-depth stuff. The new Photoshop breaks my head when I play with it because you can do scary things. You can click a button and take whole people out of pictures now. It's just terrifying. I could put your face on bodies and send you to different countries, and you could create whole identities from it. It's genuinely frightening, okay? So it costs them a lot of money to develop. Adobe sat there and went, right, everybody steals it. Why? Because it costs too much money. But a lot of people don't need to use Photoshop for very long. And this was when Adobe hit on the idea. Right, okay, we'll do it on a licensing fee. People buy it for a period of time, and then they don't get access to it. If people want to use it more, they keep paying the licensing fee, or they buy it. Okay, there'll be a point at which if somebody's used it for 20 odd months, the licensing fee would have been as much as buying it outright, so they'll probably buy it outright. Okay? That's an incredibly intelligent decision for them to make. Because actually now, Photoshop is stolen a lot less. In fact, it's very difficult now to steal it. And it's not really worth your while to steal it, because if you're only going to use it for a few weeks, I don't mind paying 14 quid, I'll pay it and use it. Okay? There are whole markets that are restructuring like this, but they're doing it very quietly, and you don't necessarily see it happening unless you're using that product day in, day out. Okay? The app market has changed radically, and yet people don't really notice. When apps first came out, the apps that cost you money, you paid for them up front. And generally you were paying quite high fees for some of the big power feature apps. Now if you look at the App Store, you generally only pay quite high fees for games and for very feature-rich apps that appeal to very particular markets. Most other apps now, it's either a very low fee within app purchases or it's free within app purchases. David could spend hours talking to you about this, that's his bag, but to put it very simply, it just basically comes down to some psychology. Okay? You are less likely to notice small amounts of money going out of your account over a period of time than you are to see one big chunk and have buyer's remorse about it. So if I can sell you something slowly and drip feed the cost of that to you, you're much more likely to buy it and engage with it. Okay? I'm not going to force anybody to say if they play this, but if anybody's played anything like Farmville or any of those kind of games, you'll know what I mean. It's insidious, Ooh, just a few more gems. Ooh, £10, that's not a lot of money. And before you know it, £10 has become 20, 20 has become 30, 30 has become 40, and you look at your bank statement going, dear God, I spent my student loan on this. There is nothing here to show what I've done. And yet that happens. There are people who spend serious amounts of money on these games, okay? I'd like to say I did a research project, but actually I got addicted to a game. I was playing, has anybody played a game called Avengers Academy on the iPad? Or Android, whatever device you choose to use, okay? And I've never really engaged with it before, but I was trying to work out how to get a particular hero, and there's a whole Reddit community, okay? There's a whole load of people who sit on Reddit all day. But for Avengers Academy, there's actually a Reddit community where people talk about how much they're spending. It's frightening. There are people who are spending £50 a week on a virtual game where all you get is an extra character that walks around your little academy. They don't do anything, they don't interact with anything, they don't touch anything or play with anything. You've just got a new little person to walk around. That's how this works. And it works on very basic psychological principles. It's a fascinating area if you want to get into understanding it. But if you're thinking about how to make people pay for products, okay, these kind of techniques can be used in other areas and are being used in other areas now. There are companies who are already breaking down the way we pay for things. Again, go back to Amazon. Has anybody bought a dash button yet? Does anybody know what dash buttons are? Okay, so dash buttons are Amazon's next big invention. Okay, they're a little Wi-Fi connected button, and you have a button for a particular product. So you might have a button for washing powder. Okay, you run out of washing powder, you press the button. Why is that a really good idea? Ease of use, but what else does it do fundamentally?
You don't see the price.
More than that.
It's very accessible.
Okay, both of you two are kind of on the right plane. Anybody else got another thought about why this really works? What's the fundamental thing that stops you buying anything? Okay, so I might actually have money on, so I don't normally even keep physical cash anymore. This stuff, okay, money. Handing this over, okay, this is a physical, psychological transaction. When I hand over money for something, I have a moment of going, should I do this? The minute you take away the relationship between this and the product, you've got people. And I don't just mean got them, they're on the hook. And this is how people get rinsed out of serious amounts of money, because that little button there, every time you press it, might be costing you £4 or £5, but there's no relationship between the amount of money and you pressing that button anymore. Okay? There are lots of examples of people who are doing this around us, okay, where they're taking away the relationship between us and money. Who's got one of these contactless cards? Right. The most dangerous innovation since the card itself is the contactless card. And the amount of money you're going to be able to spend on contactless is going up all the time. 30 quid's the current limit, it's going to go up again. You'll see it going 50, 60, 100 pounds the next few years. It's just bedding in the technology so you're not too scared of it. That contactless card removes the last barrier to payment, having to put a PIN number in. Again, that last psychological second of going, oh, no, I won't do that. Now I've just spent 30 quid. Okay? Again, it's a debate I have with my wife constantly. It's a debate I always lose. But again, fascinating area of thinking about when we're selling things to people, how do we sell them? And how do we manage that relationship between what we're selling and how we're selling it?